Well, I dubbed August as Digimon Pride Month, so seems appropriate that this is what I would wear to do a bit of a recap of that month. I guess maybe to stick with that subject a fair bit, I'll give you a little bit of a too long did not read sort of thing. In going over all the movies I reviewed, it was very interesting. I'm not sure if this is something that a lot of other trans people experience, but it very much feels like there's a disconnect between who I was and who I am. But in going through these movies, it very much just felt like it's still me. I'm still here. I just look a lot different on the outside. Which, come to think of it, it is a little strange. As when I started coming out to my friends, that was the first thing I was saying is it's basically gonna be me, but with a new coat of paint. But yet, after getting done with a bit of a vacation with my friends, I realized that there's a lot more to it than that. I mean, I have the memories of the old me, and I have some of the personality quirks of the old me, but in ways I have been upgraded that some may consider foreign or very different to the person I used to be. I guess an example I'll give is I'm a lot more open to the topic of sex. Such thing would have definitely grossed me out or scared me away, but now I'm kind of making jokes along with the rest of my friends, as well as even giving little ideas as to what I'm interested in terms of a partner. And I've definitely found out I have a type. At least when it comes to aesthetics, I can't really say I've ever really run into somebody I'm sexually attracted to. Aesthetically, sure, and then there's definitely people I felt romantically attracted to, but not sexually. But anyway, the type is, well, the quote unquote big titty goth GF. Maybe that's just a thing that kids growing up in the early 2000s were predisposed to. Because it seemed like there was just a lot of that kind of things going around in the shows that we had at the time. I will have to admit that this month very much snuck up on me. As such, I'm very happy that I just kind of jot down little things to talk about here and there on a little journal. Because I just had a very hard time thinking about crazy things that happened this month. I guess maybe the first thing to mention is I'm at the grocery store and I have a purse that goes over the shoulder. Well, there was an older woman there that was like, yeah, you don't have to wear it over the shoulder. In fact, you could just kind of tie it up in the cart. And she was even saying how, like, that would kind of wreck your shoulder a little bit, as I guess one of her grandchildren threw something up there and it just kind of threw that area of the body out of whack. It was something I never really thought of, and I'm only partially taking the advice because I still like over the shoulder bags, but it was just the idea that she saw me as a woman, which unfortunately is just not all that common. As per usual, I watch a lot of YouTube, and occasionally I get some rather strange and interesting recommendations. And one of them was about the Boy Scouts of America. I'm not sure if I've ever mentioned this before, but I was a Boy Scout. I made it all the way up to Eagle, actually. That whole thing has very much confused me, now that I'm a woman. However, it is a little different now, because now it's just Scouting US, which I find weird that this is considered quite a big deal, as there was talks about this years ago, but I guess now it's finally been finalized. But the main thing I want to bring up about that video is they very much attributed the demise of the Boy Scouts to a lack of traditional masculinity. It's certainly a theory, but I could definitely say it very much made me feel like I was part of the problem. After all, I didn't really fall in line with traditional masculinity both in the Boy Scouts and outside, and now that I'm a woman, there's almost like a little bit of a guilt that I may have partially been responsible for destroying such a great organization, but at the same time, I'm just one person as opposed to an entire culture. And on top of that, I feel like it's become a little less non for profit in recent years and has really started to go downhill because whoever's in charge of it wants to have a bigger raise. Another thing as well, which definitely added a bit of perspective to things, I was getting reacquainted with a favorite show of mine growing up, Ed, and Eddie. I was watching the episode where they were basically abducted by the Canker sisters. And the Canker sisters were basically doing everything that they were taught to believe that a loving wife would do for their husband. It was one of those things where, as I was seeing it, it just made me realize that if I would have been born as a girl, I would have very much fallen in line with very similar beliefs. I think it was Aaron from the Game Grumps that said it correctly. Back in the day, boys were given toys to kill, while girls were given toys to be able to become good homemakers. And it just kind of made me go down a line of thinking of I would have never been able to find video games, and my hobbies definitely would have been different. I would have maybe even picked up baking like my older sister. But then again, there are cis women that do like to play video games, including my older sister. Another big thing to mention as well is I found this manga. I probably mentioned manga a few times in these little videos. And it's not to say that American media doesn't have good trans representation, it's just not as common as it is in Japanese media. And I think maybe a part of that has to go to maybe the idea of gender being a little more flexible, or, well, if you want to go back historically, America was founded by the Puritans. And the Puritan belief systems were so radical for the Europeans that they were just like, yeah, get out of here. We got this new land for you. You can put all your radical beliefs in that. Just leave us alone, you know? We're fine here. And I think that's probably where this heightened awareness of not liking a whole lot of sex and being okay with violence comes from. Now I'm getting into anthropology, but the main reason I want to talk about this manga is it took a very different view of transitioning. And that's the idea of like loss as well as a fair bit of betrayal. So the basic story is our main character lives with three sisters, one older and one younger. And along the way, there has been this older brother that went to college and basically disappeared for 2 years. Well, one day he comes back as her sister. And it's a really interesting perspective because she very much loved her older brother. And she was very much betrayed when she realized that she couldn't properly say goodbye to him. All of a sudden, she was just told to accept that this is who she has in her life now, and the brother is basically dead. And I can see it from both sides of the argument, as I had a good friend that very much felt betrayed by my transition. I was very much trying to figure out how to describe it, more like an even keel, very predictable kind of person. I was quirky, sure, but I wasn't the kind of person to do daredevil stunts in real life or do something else very radical. and this very much broke that worldview. But the major differences between both of the stories is that this friend was able to say goodbye because I told them from the beginning that this is something that may or not be happening in the near future. So get your goodbyes in, get your condolences in, and we'll figure out who I become. I do have two other things I want to talk about. These were things that I wanted to mention last month, but just didn't really get the time or remember to mention them. Last month was the first time I wore a skirt in public. It was definitely a very different situation. At first, I kind of thought it was just like, oh, so it'll be just like shorts, except that like little stem separating the legs is missing. But there's a bit more to it than that. And I do remember asking for a little bit of fashion advice afterwards because I felt like I wasn't wearing it properly. I was wearing it properly, but I wasn't really wearing the right type for that type of season. It was really more of like a fall kind of skirt. But I think probably the biggest thing I noticed is when it came to the idea of sitting down in a skirt, I could definitely see why a lot of women sit with their like arms like this or like their legs are more prone together or something, as I feel very exposed whenever I would sit down in a skirt. It's nice for the hot summer months, but when it comes to people looking around, it just feels a bit like easy entry. Which is a bizarre thing to say because the front door hasn't been installed yet. So, as I was getting some advice on how to wear a skirt properly, there came up an interesting subject, the idea that there are ways to be able to wear padding to be able to widen the hips or maybe even widen the chest a little bit. That is a thing that I could do because I would fancy myself being a little more on the curvaceous side of things, but at the same time, I don't want to lie to people. I just think back to this one episode of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air where somehow Will Smith as well as his girlfriend get locked in a closet or something, and it starts getting a little hot in there. And as the episode goes on, she just keeps revealing more and more about herself. First, she takes off her wig to realize that she has very gnarled and disheveled hair. I think she takes off some of her teeth to realize that they're just crooked and all over the place. Her nail polish is fake. And along the way, Will Smith is just like, you are not the person that I dated. And I want to avoid that situation. Dating is a very terrifying thing, and it's hard to say if I'm going to be doing it any time in the near future, but I want to start up a relationship with honesty. And then the last thing to mention, this was a bit of an exercise that a friend of mine came up with, and it's the idea of writing a letter to your past self. Like a lot of things in my life, I just had a hard time as I kept overthinking it. I very much believe that the events in my life had to happen in the events that they did. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have transitioned. Or maybe I would have, but just later in life. And I just kind of worry that that knowledge of the future would have been able to throw things off entirely and make me a completely new and different person. Maybe it's just because I've been watching Back to the Future for several years at this point. That was the big thing. Doc Brown was like, the consequences could be disastrous. And after a while, I started to just take the stance that instead of it altering my future entirely, I would just deliver words of comfort to my younger self. I remember before I even started figuring out I was trans, just kind of coming up with a label was something that was able to help. And probably like a lot of other trans women, I fell for the trap of the whole artogarnophilia thing. Of course, me as an idiot, I just kind of took that as proof that I am trans because I felt this way. No, that is not the case. That is a tool that people are using to dissuade people from transitioning. And instead of really arousal, it was just the idea that for once in my life, I was seeing myself as pretty and I liked what I saw. But I digress. Giving it a name to my younger self would have definitely given me comfort. Although I'm not really sure how he would have been able to take the news, in all honesty. There was definitely an inkling of wanting to be a woman. It was always the idea of I wanted to see what it was like to be a woman for like a day, and then a week, and then after a while it was like a month. See what in the world it was like to have a period, perhaps, and then maybe a year or two. But it wasn't until the egg really started to crack that I was really on board with the idea of being a woman for the rest of my life. And this much time later, I still want to be a woman. I've just found a joy that I've never thought possible. That I can actually like what I see in the mirror. I can like how I feel. I can feel pretty rather than a disgusting mess that people say looks too feminine to be an actual man. That is all I have this time. If there's anything else you're curious about, feel free to leave a comment down below. As per usual, I do not want to get into the discussion of politics. Till next time, be yourself, no matter who that is.